Alright guys, now we're pretty much ready to start getting close to our first assembly, but what we need to do now is remove that excess material we left at the end of the back spring. We want to make sure to get it nice and squared up so that our surfaces have a nice tight mating fit. Now this is kind of the moment of no return, as in once you start removing metal from here, if you take too much away, there's really no way to get it back unless you redo your handle scales and move everything forward. So you really want to try to get it right on the first time. Take your time setting up, and if anything, try to leave a little too much at first. And sneak up on it. So what we're going to do, we're going to kind of try to sight down our blade and where we want it ultimately to end up in the open position. If anything, at this point you might want it even to be just a hair forward. That looks pretty good. And now we want to go ahead and line up our back spring. And we can even tilt the blade in just a little and go right up against that. Then what we can do is carefully take our scribe, get as close to the inside of that as we can. And now when we start removing this with the grinder, we want to kind of leave that line, or at the very most split the line. So that's going to be pretty well squared up. We'll sneak up on that with our grinder belt, and once that's done, we'll be ready to start trial fitting this together and see how well we did. Alright, I went ahead and carefully removed the excess metal almost right up to the line. I even left maybe just about half a line's width extra, and I think that's going to work out pretty good. Now I can always adjust it just a little bit more if I need to, but right now we got a pretty square, pretty tight fit, and I think once we put tension on the spring, everything's going to fit together pretty well. Again, there's still room for adjustment if needed, but right now we're ready to go to the next step. Now if you look, we left quite a bit of extra material on the back here. Now keeping in mind that we do still need to kick things forward just a little bit to line up our holes. But as it stands now, our back spring's still pretty thick, so it's going to have a tremendous amount of tension on it if we try to put everything together. So we do want to try to remove just a little bit of extra material from the back there. Not getting too carried away because the geometry will change once we put everything under tension, and it's kind of hard to tell exactly where that will be, but we'll go ahead and put a light scribe line there. I'll line up my hole and do the bottom half. And now we get a pretty good picture of the majority of material we can still take away. Obviously I left way too much there. That's going to take quite a while to pare down on the belt grinder, but better too much than not enough. So hopefully those lines show up pretty well there. I'm going to go ahead and remove at least to about a 32nd or a 16th of an inch there. I could always go a little deeper once everything's together, but right now there'd be so much tension on that spring to try to put it together. I wouldn't even want to try to begin closing it. So we're going to go ahead and clean that up, and then we're going to focus our attention on dialing the kick and the bottom of the ting in, and we can start zeroing our back spring with a dial indicator. So stay tuned. Alright, I know I'm jumping around a lot on this, but hopefully it all makes sense when it's strung together. I've done pretty much a rough assembly in the open position. I can't even try to close it right now because of a couple things. One, there's way too much material left on the bottom of the ting, and I need to radius the corners so that it has a nice smooth closing. And the other thing is that this spring's still a little bit thick. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and mark this excess, scribe it, and then grind it off flush to the scales, as that's pretty much where it's going to land. And then I'll probably even have to notch just a little bit out ahead of this pivot to take some of this tension off, as it's pretty heavy right now. Now taking some of that material off the back will help that to a degree, but probably not enough. And this is one of those things that's kind of got to be a trial and error, with hopefully little to no error, but you just kind of have to make it up as you go along and see what it feels like as you get things close. Now one thing we can do in the meantime, or even after removing that excess material, we can go ahead and start zeroing our back spring, and that'll be a little bit more involved, so let me get set up to do that, and then I'll turn the camera back on